And I've tried really hard to be open and honest and give straight advice that where you say, look, if you had the budget, you'd go carbon fiber and all this rubbish. But with what tools do you have? What can you do? And there's always something you can do. Always.
Welcome to the Your Data Driven podcast. If you like this podcast, be sure to visit our website at yourdatadriven.com for more useful help and advice on setting up your race car, mastering data analysis, and driving faster. Welcome to episode 50. 50 shows. Can you believe it? Absolutely amazing, and thank you for listening. So onwards we go to today's show, and I couldn't be more pleased to celebrate this mini milestone by welcoming Willem Toet, the former head of aerodynamics for Benetton, Ferrari, Sauber and BAR Formula One teams. He joins me for a very special two-part podcast. Aero is one of those subjects that gets a lot of airtime on the TV, but it's often hard to relate that back to what you can do yourself in the paddock. Willem has some great insights and some very practical tips. This is honestly an amazing chat with one of the best in the business. Be sure to check out all the links in the show notes for some really good follow-up videos and articles. Okay, enough of me. So, as ever, grab a pen, grab a coffee, sit back, and let's listen to what Willem has to say. So, welcome, Willem.
Thank you.
It's absolutely fantastic to have you here. I've been dying to get you on the show for quite some time now.
It's taken a while. Yeah, sorry about that.
That's absolutely fine. You're here, and I'm really excited to hear about you and your background. For those who are listening, I'm sure they will find it absolutely fascinating to have that insight from the world of Formula One and aerodynamics, that hot topic that we always hear so much about the media, but maybe don't always quite know, well, certainly from my point of view, how to translate that back to what I can do in the paddock as an amateur. And so what I do with all of these shows is lay the gauntlet down, and the challenge is, could we work towards one or two takeaways that maybe people listening could think about, they could go and try and apply, they can look at all of these subjects. I'm going to, think about aerodynamics, but, whatever from your experience will be absolutely fascinating to hear. So, so that's it. So we have a little bit about you and then some of that. How does that sound?
Good. Yep. Happy to talk about that. Happy to go there. So your audience is mainly amateur racers or largely, do you think?
Largely, yes. Although, most of the Formula One grid do listen now because it's,
you never know.
You never know. There's always something you can learn. And I think that's one of the...
Oh, there is.
One of the
always.
things...
There's always...
it's one of the things that I've certainly discovered having done shows like this. I often, just to say a bit on that, is that when I started, it was very much like, what can we learn from the pros? I race as a hobby, but I'm a professional. But interestingly, it's the people who almost take it the most seriously, or the people who are, more professional, who are actually always looking to learn. And so it's very difficult to define the audience now, but we're all motorsports enthusiasts.
Because I started preparing a car for a girlfriend at university in the 70s. I'm old, and a little bit preparing cars and motorbikes for myself. That's where I started, with absolutely no knowledge or training whatsoever. And there, it's a place where I was helped by people with knowledge, and now being in the lucky position of working in top-end motorsport for a long time, and also in the lucky position that I continued to do some, let's say, amateur motorsport, some hill climbing, that you're in touch with people who don't have the resources you have in Formula One. Well, then you've got to give advice that takes into account the resources that they have. And I've tried really hard to be open and honest and give straight advice that where you say, look, if you had the budget, you'd go carbon fiber and all this rubbish. But with what tools do you have? What can you do? And there's always something you can do. Always. Yeah.
I think that's such a refreshing approach. And it must help, actually, in the day job, always having that sort of resource constrained idea, because
I think it does.
It's what do they say? It's like you can't, because you do some work with universities as well, I think, and I think to be able to explain anything, you really have to sort of know it from the foundation level, as it were. And then if you're almost spoilt a bit with the tools and technology you have with a lot of resources, maybe you don't quite always understand it quite as well.
Yeah. So a little example of Formula One gone mad and being careful with resources. I've always thought a lot about using, let's say, the most precious time. I've never considered my time to be the most precious thing, although the truth is you only have so much time on the planet, if you know what I mean. We haven't invented the live forever pill, and thank goodness we haven't, because we've got a big enough population problem as it is without the live forever pill. And so you have a limited amount of time on the planet. So it is the most precious resource, but I've always thought, okay, what is the thing that's limiting, let's say, the development of this project we're working on? And quite often, for many, many years, it was time in the wind tunnel. So when I started, my first Aero project was actually without a wind tunnel at all. It was in Australia, working on an English Formula 3 car, or let's say European, but it was English Formula 3 car, taken to Australia and to be converted to race in Australian Formula 2. So you had different powertrain requirements, you had bigger tyres you had to use or could use, you had different aerodynamic regulations. And the first thing I actually learned about was the suspension didn't work, just didn't work with the much bigger diameter tyres we had for the Australian regulations. But it was a March 793. And March came with different pickup points because they sold these cars around the world. So with no engineering knowledge at all, my degree at university was in biochemistry and genetics.
Wow.
Nothing motorsport related.
Wow.
I fell in love with motorsport through my first wife, a girlfriend at university, who wanted to go racing. Who's going to prepare the car, Willem? That'll be me then. Young, enthusiastic man.
Well, I think a lot of parents listening maybe of that situation is, that'll be me then. I'll be the sponsor as well.
Yeah.
Then. Go on.
Exactly. Let's go for it. And she was at least as quick as I was. I'm a very enthusiastic human in everything I do. And she was at least as quick as I was driving a car, more, let's say, refined. I'm very step beyond the limit, then take a tiny step back and see if you are then on the limit. Yeah. She would approach the limit instead of sticking beyond it, instead of leaping beyond it. And very, very quick. But who's going to prepare the car? Well, that's me. So I learned about motorsport and the benefits, if you like, or the fun that it gives you, I learned from doing. And then there were various experienced engineers and drivers who helped with advice. I'm sure it didn't hurt that having a girl driving, being able to compete with the boys at that time in the 70s, would have been mid-70s. It was before the March 793. In the mid-70s, having a girl driving against the boys and being completely competitive, like winning races in one-make touring car series, winning races in Formula Fords. Really competitive against the best of the boys. That taught me, if you like, a lot about motorsport and how difficult it is to be competitive. And so I've learned a great deal. For example, you have a one-make touring car series and you're not allowed to change much at all. For example, you had to use, in the first series, you had to use the standard springs and standard dampers.
Yeah.
And so an old racing hand said, okay, well, you've got to use standard springs, but there's nothing say that the springs have to be really, really new. And people had tried taking the springs to, in Melbourne, it would be Melbourne, Australia, where I grew up, it would be Central Springs in Melbourne, and they would take your standard springs and reset them for you. But that was illegal, and all the standard paint markings were gone and things like this. So I found a breaker's yard. Now in England it's a breakers. In Australia they call them wreckers. So I found a wreckers yard, and this was for Renault 12s, going back a bit. And there was a Renault 12 at the bottom of a big pile of cars. And I said, I'd like the springs from that 1972 Renault 12. And the mechanic in charge said, oh, no, we don't need to go there, sir. We've got a nice used set in the office ready to go. And no, I want those. Well, that's $20 extra then, you bastard. Excuse my friend. It's $20 extra, UB, because we have to take all those cars up, and that takes... Anyway, I waited. I got the springs, and they're like an inch lower than standard springs. So then I've got completely standard springs for this car that are an inch lower. You're not allowed to lower the cars. You've got to use standard springs. And so you learn with a road car going racing, okay, you have to use the standard springs, but you want to get your center of gravity lower. So then inch lower and brand new dampers, because they're going to be as good as you're going to get. Or used dampers, not much damping, not what you want. So that was my first lesson. And then the next lesson was, okay, you're not allowed to blueprint the engine. Well, you're allowed to blueprint the engine, as in you can select parts, but you're not allowed to take any weight off. So to balance a set of pistons, you couldn't. You weren't allowed to even grivel anything. Nothing.
No.
It was illegal. But you could go to the main importer for Renault and weigh the 400 pistons they had in stock at the main importer at Renault.
Yeah.
And the reason they had 400 pistons in stock is that this was the days when things were not that reliable. And two things. One, they weren't quite as reliable, but also we had the ethos back then of you make it last 25 years and therefore you have to rebuild it. And we don't have the same ethos, and maybe some of that we have to go back on, but that is another subject altogether. So then I'm weighing 400
I was going to say, it's always
pistons.
the case today that things are still a little bit... We had an example in our race series where you have a standard cam. It's a printed cam. You have to use this cam. And the manufacturer of said cam is, it's not an industrial global giant. They're variable. So it was reasonably common. Well, again, we bought 5 of them and measured them all, chose the one we liked the best and sent the other 4 back.
Yeah. Well, so I did that with pistons. So you then select 4 that have the same weight, and there's maybe 1 that was lower, but you select 4 the same weight, minimum weight. And I did the same. The engine builder I spoke to suggested weigh the big ends and small ends of all the conrods you can get. So I did weigh all the big ends, all the small of the conrods. And you have a set that are 4 the same, and he told me what the target should be, but basically the lightest and balanced. And then measure all the camshafts, and they probably had 50 camshafts. So measure the lobe and measure the maximum. Effectively, you're looking for the maximum lift. Yeah. So we did that. That may have helped my girlfriend at the time to be doing well in races, but she was also a very good driver. And when you get say to Formula Ford, any advantage you may have in the vehicle is gone. That's incredibly competitive. And then we split up. And I thought, okay, was it only her? Or really, is motorsport something special?
Wouldn't it be great to get just that little bit more grip from your tyres? To have complete confidence that you're setting the ideal tyre pressures for your car, your driving style, the track you're on, even the session type you're competing in. And what if you knew exactly what to do, no matter what the weather threw at you? Join the hundreds of pro and am drivers and engineers who've taken the Master Your Tyres program. Become my test driver in training, follow my step-by-step guides, and learn how to apply the included pro-grade Smart Run Sheet. You will discover how to design practical experiments that will help you to precisely set up your tyres every single time. You can finally fill in the blanks and develop a more complete mental model of tyre mechanics. What makes them happy, what doesn't, all in bite-sized video lessons and presented from the driver's perspective. Visit tyrecourse.com to learn more about how to get more grip and more performance from the only part of your car that touches the racetrack.
And for me, what was really special is I could make a difference today, race it tomorrow, or even make a difference with the setup of the car and see it race, and you get this instant feedback. You've done a good job or a bad job.
Absolutely,
instant.
Yeah.
And that hooked me completely. And then with the March I didn't have any clue back then about suspension kinematics, but I'd had some advice from some really sensible, a guy called Frank Gardner, an engineer, race driver, Australian, but also raced in the UK in tin tops in the era of Jim Clark, that sort of era. He was a better engineer. He was a really great driver, but not Jim Clark. Yes, he was fantastic, but how do you beat a Senna or a Jim Clark? It's hard. Yeah. But he gave me some really good advice, just to open your eyes and look. And with this march, I literally took some I measured up the car, looked at the potential pickup points and looked at what you could adjust, got a bit of cardboard on a table, some strips of cardboard for the suspension legs in front view, and literally moved the upright up and down, the pretend upright up and down with no spring or no damper, just to see what happens to the camber. Where does the contact patch go? Does it go sideways? Does it just go up and down? And then that for me was an absolute revelation.
Amazing, isn't it?
That
cardboard CAD, then, we call it. I used to work with it.
Exactly.
Cardboard CAD. Exactly.
I took that later, when I came to England later, I took that, put it into a little computer program, and I remembered to draw things like the effective swing axle length and to draw the suspension moving, because I was a little bit worried about my ability to program the maths correctly, and I figured if I drew it, I'd see when I'd made a mathematical error.
Exactly. Yeah.
So,
and it's so easy to make a mathematical error. Like you get assigned the one
really easy,
the geometry,
really easy to make mistakes, and having a way of checking. And then we also had different aerodynamic rules with this march that we could use in Australia. Things like you could have wider bodywork, wider wings. The rear wing could go further back. So we made one steps at a time. And for example, it had almost like a sports car nose on this open wheeler, and we were able to go wider. So we made a wider sports car nose, and the thing then oversteered like a pig. It was like, wow, much more front grip, but really dangerous to drive. So then we just made a wider rear wing and moved it further back. And then we had a car with much more downforce if we needed downforce, or you could just wind it off if you didn't.
So I've got a question for you on that one. So you've experimented there. So I have this thing where I've got a little saying, you don't learn from experience, you learn from experiments. And the reason that I find that empowering is because a lot of the time in the paddock, certainly when I've been there, you go out, you try something, you come back and it's not quite what you expected. And a lot of good advice, paddock folklore, I call it, from people who are all around, and they're throwing ideas and solutions at you. And all of them sound credible. And it's like, and you end up, but some can be completely opposite. Like one could be like, oh, you go this way, and then the other could be that way. And they're both completely credible. And you're like, they're all great, thank you, but it's not helping me work this out. And one of the things with the experiment is you have to kind of predict what you're going to do beforehand. You have to sort of lay it on the line. So I'm going to change this and I expect this to happen. But if it doesn't, it's probably going to be because of the X, Y, and Z reason or whatever. But also it doesn't get you down. You just sort of go, okay, that happened. And let's just try and work out exactly what did actually happen, not what we assume happened. And then spend a little bit more time on working out what happened than jumping to a solution. But then not get down about it and just search, okay, well, what do I do? Do I reverse out of that? Or in your case, what you just said, like, okay, I will keep that, but then I will compensate at the back of the car. The reason it was oversteering or whatever is because I've now got more grip at the front than I had before, which is a good thing, So you're like, I want to put some at the back to balance the whole thing out. So how did you deal with that? Like, did you have that thought process, or were you thinking, oh no, we should take it off?
Precisely that. Yeah. So there was a switch in my head. I was about 7 years old. My dad had died when I was 6. So I had a really tough early life. I will not go into it all, but I had a really tough early life.
Sorry.
Dad died when I was 6. Mum's on a widow's pension. She had 5 kids, one on the way, so 6 kids. Wow. We had no money. And between us, we had one cheap alarm clock. And it would be taken from Mum's bedroom into the lounge room. That would be our clock. And on my way one day, I dropped the clock and it broke. And My mum was very upset. And as a 7-year-old, I thought, well, yeah, that's my fault. I broke it. What do I do? And with my younger brother, one of the things we used to do on the way to preschool and school was we'd go wandering. We'd take the long way and we'd go via the tip and have a rummage and just see what was there that was interesting. And we found an old clock, and I went to a watchmaker jeweler with my broken clock and asked, could you fix it? And he said, look, it's a Woolworths clock. You pay you $2 and you buy another one. Well, $2? Oh, I've saved up a penny. Can you fix it? No, but someone gave me a couple of broken clocks. And I think it was one of these watchmakers. Look, here's a couple of broken clocks. One's got the same thing wrong as yours. Leave that one alone. Here's one with something different. Maybe take that one apart and have a little bit of a look at it and see maybe what's wrong. Take the back off and have a look. So I took the back off, and two main things go wrong. If the clock's not like worn out completely, you overwind the mainspring and you break where the mainspring, right in the root of the mainspring where you wind it, you break it. That's one thing that goes wrong. And the other, you have a little lightweight spring that does the timing. It's like with a mass that does the timing, and it has two little pins that go onto a gear that allow the gear to turn, not turn, turn, not turn. And one of those pins will break. That's what was wrong with mine. And by looking at the clock with the broken spring, all I needed to do was replace the spring from one of the two clocks that didn't have a broken spring. I had a working clock and presented it to my mother. And I was the smartest man on the planet at the age of 7 years old. After that, it gets harder.
Yeah, but still,
and
that feeling.
But what that did is it told me, and my take was, if you understand how things work, you can fix things. If you can fix things, you can make people happy. So from that moment, I started a little mini clock repair business, earning a penny, which that was a big deal for us. Yeah. And so started repairing clocks and just got me into loving the idea of understanding mechanisms. And so that applied then to suspension on the race car, it applied to the aerodynamics on the race car. So I do have this philosophy is, what can you open up without doing any damage? Something stopped working. Can you take the back off carefully without doing any damage? Well, you can certainly take the back off and have a look. Now, there are some things that are quite dangerous. Let's say a TV's broken, and an old-style TV, and you take the back off and it's got some big capacitors. They can retain quite a powerful charge that'll give you a shock months after you've disconnected them. So you have to be careful. But what can I do? Opening something up and having a look. And for me, the same applies to tuning. Yeah. Well, I've electrocuted myself when I shouldn't have, doing something silly.
Oh, no.
Yeah. Yeah. Anyway, that's...
it's a philosophy, though, isn't it? That's a philosophy.
It is.
It's something that... But also that...
Take the first step. See what you can understand. And I did the same. So there are a few things happened that allowed me to make steps in life. So I've got the wrong degree for motorsport, but I've got this attitude of investigating, and I've got a certain amount of experience then preparing cars. And while at university, so I left home young at 16, needed to finish school, 2 years of school I needed to finish, had to figure out how to effectively put myself through. So I was very lucky that a young couple who were starting a family took me on as a foster son for a couple of years. But in the end, then you're still trying to look after yourself. And then once I got to university, I'm then an independent human being. I have a scholarship to pay my university fees, which was fantastic.
Amazing.
But I needed to live. So I had a job working in the university union, washing dishes, serving tables. I had a job on mowing lawns for a school that had extensive sports fields. I'd had a job as a kid anyway, as paper rounds and things like that. I was used to working. And then I got a job night shift while I was at university, Thursday night, Friday night, Saturday night, pumping petrol at a petrol station. So then Friday lectures were hard, you understand. Yeah, because you've done Thursday night shift all night. And then, well, you can't really go to bed, can you? What do you do? And And so, yeah, Friday lectures were a bit dozy for me. And then you lose every Saturday because you do Thursday night, Friday lectures, Friday night, then Saturday morning you go to bed, you just completely cream crackered and you just sleep through. And the boss learnt 11:30, ring me up so that I'm there for midnight just for the proper start of the right. It was really a late night shift.
Wow.
But when in those days cars were less reliable, a car would come in or be towed in with a problem. You open the bonnet and you have a look. It's not going to hurt to open the bonnet. You might see and you would see things like it's got a terrible misfire and it's nighttime. So you open the bonnet with this terrible misfire and you literally see a spark coming through the distributor cap because today's engines, you would see nothing because it's all completely hidden. It's all undercover. It's all tightly packaged.
Yep.
But in those days, the engine was well exposed. There was plenty of hand room to get around. And we used to keep distributor caps in the office. So you just, what make and model, look up the distributor cap, replace the distributor cap, make sure you remember the order of the leads, put the leads on carefully, and you've solved the customer's problem. And again, you feel I love it when you can solve someone's problems. Yeah.
Yeah. You may know that at the end of season 1, I wrote the Motorsports Playbook, a summary distilling the first 20 shows into nuggets of wisdom. I made the notes so that you don't have to. If you've not got it yet, go and grab yourself a copy from the website.
So that got me more knowledge, if you like, about cars and what goes wrong. And so same sort of attitude. And then the same applied with the aerodynamics on this Mark 793, that a wider nose gave you didn't get any drag change really at all. You took drag off the front wheels and put it onto bodywork that was generating downforce. And then the rear wing, by moving the rear wings further back and reducing its angle, you were able to balance that nose, have the same drag as you had before, but have a car with more downforce. And it was like, eureka, like, wow.
Yeah.
And we so much so, we almost didn't believe it, and we did a back-to-back test because you just changed the nose cone and you put the old rear wing back on.
And how did you
we have a new wing?
So if someone is listening thinking, I've got like something, that I want to explore with my Aero or whatever. I do have a reader question actually for you, which is kind of, we could throw it in now. And it's about like, if of all the different parts of a car, what's kind of the most efficient to least efficient part of a car to change if you were changing something for exactly this kind of thing? And, and then how do you know if it's making a difference? And I might feel it as a driver, but I might not as well. So is there something that I could do to help me determine or not? I'm getting less drag.
On a sports car or an open wheel car. So let's focus first on open wheel cars. The most efficient device, if you've got any scope at all to do anything there, would be the floor.
Okay, yeah. So the bit floor. You don't see.
The bit you don't see. A front wing will be the next, and the rear wing will be the least efficient.
Okay.
And that is, efficiency for aerodynamics is the ratio between how much downforce it produces compared to how much drag it has.
Yeah.
And so a floor... So I'll give you one crude way of estimating the form drag of an object. So let's take...
Form drag as in the shape, like...
Yeah, the drag caused by the shape. So there's two types of drag.
Yeah.
There is skin friction. So if I blow over my phone, I have skin friction.
Yeah.
But if you put it at an angle and move it relative to the flow, so that skin friction is not going to be 10 times as much when you're at an angle compared to when you're on the flat. It's going to change, but not dramatically. But if you think, so let's take our phone and we put it at an angle and we're pushing it through the air in this direction, okay? We're going... Then if you think, I've got pressure acting on a surface, so I'm increasing the pressure there and I'm reducing the pressure there, and I've got this angle, then that's going to tell you the angle of the force. That's the angle of the pressure force. That will have, and let's say the average angle is like that, then you're going to have if you've got a difference in pressure between the top surface and the bottom surface, then the angle that force is acting is at 90 degrees to your surface. So let's say like this, you're going to have a downforce to drag ratio of 10 to 1. Look at a rear wing. You've got a downforce to drag ratio of 1 to 1, or 2 to 1, say, or 1 to 1.
Okay.
That's why. That's your efficiency right there. Now, it's not the whole picture because you're missing skin friction drag. And there are all sorts of, when you get into great detail, there are lots of details.
Well,
it gets really
that's the lovely thing about
complicated.
motorsport. We're never short of complexity and detail. And I think one of the big challenges is to reverse out of as often as possible.
But one of the things that I really love about the time I have in my life now being able to pass on what I've learned is you can strip away some of that complexity and find the essence that lets you make progress without needing the higher degree in mathematics and without needing all those layers. Understand the complexity because it is complex, but look for where it could be relatively simple. And so efficiency, you can, if you just think, how much air is going in the front of my device? How much air is coming out the back? What's the average angle of attack of that device? And that's going to give you a clue about the efficiency. It's only a clue, but it works. For, say, front wing, floor, rear wing, it works.
Yeah, so almost like taking it as a black box and saying, well, I'm sort of pushing it at this end and I'm getting this output over here. And if I sort of adjust the angle ever so slightly, I'm going to get a different output for the same input, in effect. And then and in a way, you could just design some experiments with your car with maybe ride height or, in your case, different wing settings or whatever to try and like work out, okay, what difference has that made, if any? I had a guest on a little while ago, and he is an aerodynamics expert as well, and he suggested a couple of different tests that you could do, practical tests, looking at tufts, tuft testing and wool and yarn and things, which was all a big news for me. But also this idea of a top speed test, so or at least a speed in a particular gear. So you sort of go flat out in a particular gear, and if you depending on the speed that you got to, was related, that's sort of proportionate to the drag that you have. So is that
that's quite a good way. How fast you accelerate, given certain conditions.
Of course, yeah.
Coast down is another equivalent thing. You go to top speed, suddenly stop in a consistent way, everything consistent, but suddenly just say, if you've got a manual car, put it into neutral, decide you're going to put the foot on the clutch or not on the clutch, but everything should be consistent. So the higher the speed, the more accurate your measure of drag will be, and you just compare the rate at which the car slows down one run to another if you've changed something on the car. It's in the end, good experiments are simple. And wool tufts, so if you want to make a lot of cotton or wool tufts to put onto a car, then I suggest you take a sheet. So here I've got let's say an A4 ring binder. Yeah. Take your cotton and wind it round something. It might be a sheet of aluminium or a sheet of steel. Take a cotton, wind it round and round and round.
Yeah.
Tape it at the beginning and the end. Then take some strips of tape and put them downwards, and then cut beside one edge of the tape. And then you've got lots of cotton tufts made all at once.
I learned
that because
You've done that before.
I've done that a lot, because imagine one at a time sticking around. Time is everything. And so I was going to explain right at the beginning, a Formula One thing's gone mad.
Yeah.
So we started wind tunnel testing. My first was 2 shifts in a wind tunnel to design the bodywork of a car. 2 8-hour shifts. That was all we had, and you had to design the bodywork of the car in 2 8-hour shifts. And that was done for the Bovis-sponsored Aston Martin Nimrod that ran in 1983 and 1984. We did the work in 1982, 2 8-hour shifts. We doubled the downforce of the car with 2 8-hour shifts. So you take the standard, as produced 1981, 1982 Aston Martin Nimrod, and we doubled the downforce with new bodywork. Incredible. Wow. And that was another 2 8-hour shifts. But then you get to Formula One, it gets harder. And people have been working for years, yeah? But when I first got to Formula One, it was an 8-hour shift, 5 days in a wind tunnel, 3 weeks out. So you had a week in, 3 weeks out, a week in, 3 weeks out. It was an ex-military facility, still managed by the military. Strictly, you arrive at 9 and we stop work at 5:30 and you have an hour for lunch. That was your day. And if you wanted more, the boss would say, can you convince Alan in the wind tunnel to work on for another half hour, please? Give him $20 and I'll give you the money back when you get back to work. And what about us, boss? Do we get any tip ourselves? No, no.
You just get on. The privilege of working here. Yeah,
exactly.
Grateful.
Well, the contract was you do whatever hours are required to get the job done. Yeah, and that was long hours. And so anything like putting tufts on would be part of, even in Formula One in those days, it was part of what we did. You looked at the airflow, especially for someone like me, without the theoretical training that I should really have got myself early on in my days in Formula One. It was very helpful to get visual cues as to what the air was doing. So a really useful thing will be a tuft of cotton on a wad. So we would have just a metal rod with just a little bit of wool on the end of it. And you could move that. We had the advantage of working with an open working section wind tunnel. So you could just take a long rod and poke it into the airflow from outside where there was very little flow and just look at what the air did and move the rod around to see, well, there's nothing stopping you in, say, on a closed track doing that sort of thing, or taking a few GoPros or a GoPro, point it up at a particular part of the car, plaster it with tufts and have a look at what the flow is doing.
Yeah.
You can do that.
What do you look for in a tuft?
It'll depend where.
Okay.
If you want low drag, you want the tuft to be pretty much stationary in a fixed position.
Okay.
So it doesn't move around like crazy. Yeah.
Yeah.
But if say on the upper surface of bodywork and wings, if you want clean flow, and in particular if you want low drag, it has to be nicely settled. The air if you create a shape that is too extreme, the air will separate. That will cause turbulence.
Yeah.
And then just ahead of that point, if you want a low drag body, just ahead of that point where the air goes turbulent, you want to add some material to make the shape change smoother. So the best shape is a very, very elongated teardrop is the best shape. Very low drag. And the difference is like 10 to 1 or more. You take a round bar.
Yeah.
The front of a round bar is good. The back of a round bar is a disaster. And you go to an elongated teardrop so that you have a ratio of, say, 5 width to 5 length to 1 width, a really elongated teardrop, and it's likely to have 1/10 of the aerodynamic drag of a round bar.
Sorry, a 10. A 10.
A 10th. Yeah, a 10th. It's staggering. That's what I think. That's where I think aerodynamics like, wow, what? No, that can't be right. Yep, it's right. And so, for example, if you have round wishbones, you can put a teardrop-like shape around the outside, make it a bit bigger and still have less drag.
Wow.
That's very cool.
And that's it for part 1. What a fascinating story so far, and a tough background that Willem has had. Little did he know that in fixing that clock at 7 years old, possibly the rest of his whole life would be dominated by trying to beat the clock in future. Hope you got as much out of this as I did. Remember to check out all the links in the show notes, and I look forward to having you join us again in part 2. If you like this episode, be sure to subscribe to the podcast and visit us at yourdatadriven.com.